37%, and North Carolina is not immune. In fact, we consistently rank among the top states in the U.S. for the number of reports to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Something has to change. What many of us in the anti-human trafficking field have come to realize, what survivors have told us, and what research has shown is the best way to prevent human trafficking is to address those individuals who are fueling the crime, the buyers. The North Carolina Demand Reduction Task Force was created to do just that. The mission of the task force is to create and execute a comprehensive plan to reduce the demand for the services of exploited persons in North Carolina. We envision a North Carolina where there is no demand for the services of exploited individuals. We invite you to stand with us. Let's work together to combat human trafficking in our state. For more information about the task force and our demand reduction efforts, please visit ncdemandreduction.com. Human trafficking is the fastest growing. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the North Carolina Demand Reduction Task Force, we want to welcome you to our fourth and final webinar in our 2025 series, Behind the Demand. You're invited to put your name and organization, if you're part of an organization, in the chat. And you guys can go ahead and get to know each other. My name is Nikki Miller. I am the Executive Director of SHIELD North Carolina, which is an anti-human trafficking nonprofit located in Apex, which is just outside of Raleigh. I also co-founded and co-lead the North Carolina Demand Reduction Task Force. So the Demand Reduction Task Force convened several years ago as a statewide effort of anti-trafficking advocates and lived experience experts to create and execute, like the video said, a comprehensive plan to reduce the demand for the services of exploited persons in North Carolina. The goal of the task force is to launch effective programs that address demand for both sex and labor trafficking. All right, so each year the task force hosts a webinar series, but this year is the first year we've opened it up to the public. And we did this to propel the expansion of the narrative regarding human trafficking. Supporting survivors and prosecuting traffickers is absolutely essential, and so is holding buyers accountable. Buyers are the ones fueling this crime, creating the demand. Demand reduction is the only research-backed strategy proven to prevent human trafficking. So if there's no buyers, there are no victims, right? So this year's webinars aim to invite the public to see the full picture and help, like I said, expand that conversation to include that third part of the equation, the buyers. So in our introductory webinar, we discussed how demand fuels human trafficking industry and the importance of having legislation in place to support those demand reduction efforts. The next week, we learned how culture shapes the normalization of exploiting others. And the leaders of A Call to Men explained the importance of men's role in shifting the views of a culture that objectifies others. And they encouraged us all to dare to speak up and speak out when we see this objectification happening. Last week, we learned from a lived experience expert as she described to us demand reduction from her perspective, including the connection of pornography to human trafficking. And if you missed any of these, you can get them all in a few weeks. They will be up on our website. So in each of these webinars, we've shared ways that you could join the demand reduction movement. And in this final session, we'll put it all together and empower you to invite others into this effort, especially those in leadership roles that can affect change. So tonight, we will see the power of ordinary folks like us who refuse to look away. Faced with the staggering reality of human trafficking, they didn't retreat. With courage, they said, enough is enough. what began as one voice, their voice, one choice, one step grew into these movements we're going to hear about. The movements fueled by the belief that change begins with us and that we can affect change. Louie Greek will tell us about Truckers Against Trafficking and their man-to-man campaign. Nellie Rodriquez, with the help of her interpreter, Marcos Martins, will describe the determined work of the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. And you guys will have an opportunity to ask our speaker questions by entering your questions on that Q&A tab. It may be at the bottom of the screen or the top of the screen, wherever you have your menu bar. If you'll enter your questions into that Q&A tab, that'll help sort them out from the comments. All right, so let's start with Louie Greek. He's a training specialist with Truckers Against Trafficking, and he has had over 25 years of law enforcement, military, and humanitarian aid experience. Let me stop sharing my screen here, and we can get him on camera. So, Louie, how did you get involved in this anti-trafficking work you do?
Yeah, Nikki, thank you for having me and Truckers Against Trafficking. It was about maybe th 13 years ago. I had a career in law enforcement and military. And actually, throughout my careers, I had never heard about the issue of human trafficking. Our law enforcement department did not focus on it. It went from the perspective of more looking at prostitution and actually going after those that are caught up and victimized by prostitution. And so, it was about 13 years ago when a nonprofit organization came to my department and kind of told me about the issue of human trafficking. And it really surprised me. From there, I kind of spent a number of years assisting law enforcement throughout the United States and overseas in combating this crime. In particular, is supporting law enforcement and service providers in Southeast Asia, Africa, anywhere from in gathering information, intelligence, being able to create what I help support the Internet Crimes Against Children laboratory and at the Rural Thai Police. And then about 7 years, after spending that time overseas working this crime, came back to the United States and joined TAD or Truckers Against Trafficking. And again, realizing that this problem is just as bad in the United States as it is anywhere else. And just from the unique perspective of an individual that comes from pretty male dominated industries, law enforcement, military, transportation, and trucking, it seemed like a good fit to really join this organization and have this conversation among those with those industry sectors. I think TAT does an excellent job at combating human trafficking as an organization. But I think what's important as we're doing tonight is having the conversation of addressing demand, really addressing that at the root cause of what's really happening out there. Can we see my screen okay? Great. So, with Truckers Against Trafficking, or TAT as we now go by, we're an organization that's been around for about 15 years that really looks to partner with the transportation, energy, and logistics industries to ensure that they have training and resources to combat human trafficking. I think a lot of times, oftentimes, people don't think about the ways that traffickers utilize our transit and transportation systems to exploit individuals in broad daylight across our country. And on top of that, I think a lot of people don't think about the opportunity and the power and the role that these frontline workers have in regards to identifying and reporting human trafficking, as well as assisting potential victims. And then on top of that, these industries predominantly and still are today male dominated. And so this is a place where potential toxic masculinity can play a role and spread. And so that's why we find it important to insert the conversation about addressing demand, not only for commercial sex, but also in regards to labor trafficking. So tonight I want to share about some of those intersections between transportation and human trafficking, and then how that looks like in regards to addressing demand, and then some of the resources and tools we have to equip those that are attending tonight to go out in your community. And it doesn't have to be with transportation, but some of those tools that you can have to continue the conversation past this webinar tonight and the series that we have going on. So, As folks are sitting here, watching this webinar, the lights are on, the computer's being powered. This is all being powered by the energy, transportation, and logistics industries. And if you think about some of these venues and industries that are up here on the slide here, restaurants, agriculture, canning, fishing, landscaping, painting, healthcare, trucking, automotive, all these industries have intersections with the transportation and logistics industries, which means there's a number of different intersections where individuals that are working in those industries can identify potential victims, potential trafficking, and report that, as well as these are places where we could put up information, signage that might be able to reach messaging for those that are experiencing that exploitation. And so, as you're looking at all these industries here, I want you to think about, how many of these that you experience throughout the day, that you stop at, whether going to and from work, picking up the kids from school, going grocery shopping, mowing the lawn on the weekends. That all involves the transportation logistics industries. And so there really is a part for everyone to play when it comes to combating human trafficking within transportation. And our work over the years, well, we have realized that, whether it be public transportation, bus terminals, bus stops, DMV, the government agencies that regulate and enforce our commercial vehicle industries, schools, half of our students here in the United States actually take the school bus to and from school every day. And many of those actually take city buses to and from school. Travel centers and truck stops, gas stations, convenience stores, ride shares, you name it. And that's only, I'm just scratching the surface. There is really a lot of opportunity for all these industries that are so massive that keep our country going on a daily basis to really kind of play that vital role in curbing human trafficking from taking place at these industries. Because as we talked about, and as you probably heard through the previous webinar series, a lot of this starts at the demand aspect. If there weren't no buyer, we'd have no victim and we'd have no sex trafficking. And so when we think about this crime, when we approach this crime, this could be the time to insert this conversation as we're informing companies like Amazon and Amazon drivers as they're driving through neighborhoods and communities and suburbs delivering packages. How can they be aware of some of the things that might indicate potential trafficking at a location that they're dropping off somebody, or at a truck stop that they stop at that day to fuel up? Or, how can they insert the conversation that we're having tonight with fellow colleagues, with other men, women, community members on some of the typical behaviors that have been normalized within this industry and how it's actually causing harm to our sons, daughters, mothers, and brothers out there? Really, how these frontline industry workers can just become these everyday heroes. And so, this is where we need to ensure that we're holding individuals accountable for their actions while we have and insert this conversation and really get rid of and dispel some of those myths that have been pretty common around the transportation and logistics industries. So as we think about demand, and everybody I think is pretty aware of that, it is caused by when someone is going out and demanding commercial sex or labor, and that criminal entrepreneur is meeting that demand through force, fraud, and coercion. And it comes in many forms. This could be street-based prostitution, as we know, escort services. A lot of things are happening online. And again, that demand really kind of fuels everything. So if we insert the conversation, then hopefully we don't have to do some of the catch-up work on the legwork on the back end in regards to reaching those that have already been experiencing this exploitation. So again, when you think about, truck stops, I'll use that as a great example there. A lot of times our movies, our TV shows kind of really display or portray, a truck stop as a seedy, dark place. Where traditionally in the past, it was pretty common that street-based prostitution happened at these locations. And as we know, oftentimes the majority of those that are forced in commercial sex are not there by choice. And so again, you have this male-dominated industry. They're oftentimes away from family, friends, homes, whatever it may be, relationships, marriages. And they're at these locations where they're staying overnight, and traffickers and pimps for a long time, longer than we've been talking about this issue currently in modern day, have been exploiting these locations have been exploiting individuals at these locations, forcing them to knock on cab windows, to approach drivers and industry members with commercial sex. And so, again, not only do we want to be able to inform those industry members, those drivers out there about the issue of human trafficking, but also the role that they can play. If they're sitting there at that truck stop, could they see something that's going on that may indicate human trafficking? We have a number of accounts from survivors of human trafficking that have told us about how drivers have made a call on their behalf. So they may be forced to approach a vehicle, they knock on that window, and that driver has gone through TATS Truckers Against Trafficking training for drivers out there. And so they're aware about some of those indicators about human trafficking. And so they know what to do and how to react. Instead of engaging in potential commercial sex, they know, hey, can I help you? Can I call somebody for you? Can I call a hotline? So again, we want to change that mentality and normalize beliefs around some of those industries where this has probably been traditionally accepted. I think we've done an excellent job in the last 15 years to really insert our message and our mission to change that older mentality that I've been mentioning that was there before. To really realizing that, this is an opportunity for this industry, these frontline workers, and those that are utilizing these transit systems to stand up and come together and stop those that are being exploited through our transportation sectors and industries. So again, we try to do that in a number of ways by providing free training and resources to frontline workers, maybe to posting up a victim-centered poster that can go into bathrooms at truck stops or rest areas, port of entries, maybe messaging that could go at bus stops or bus terminals or rest areas, or maybe working with rideshare companies to display information as it relates to human trafficking. And so we are seeing a huge difference. We work with legislators and government agencies out there to ensure that law enforcement knows how to respond when they're pulling vehicles over or trucks along the highways. We work with government agencies to change legislation to ensure that, as of right now, 14 states in the United States require you to receive human trafficking training in order to get your commercial driver's license. So, what are we doing here? Well, we're creating cultural change. Why do we care? Because we're really making a difference here. We're changing from normalized beliefs that have been there to really changing these industries and massive systems out there to no longer looking at this is the way things have been done, or boys will be boys, or this is just how it's always been accepted, to really truly making a difference. And I think we're seeing a change within our industry. We're seeing industry leaders, CEOs of companies like Walmart, UPS, Love's Travel Centers, TA Travel Centers. They're joining us in this fight, and they're heavily invested, not only with their funding and their financial support, but they're all in and ensuring that these messagings, these resources are put up at their locations and their employees are trained and equipped to handle this. And oftentimes we have to talk about the online aspect. In the past, and as I mentioned before, typically individuals would have to go somewhere or travel somewhere to engage in commercial sex, like a truck stop or strip club or massage parlor. But as we know now, with the dawn of the internet, oftentimes individuals can engage in these activities and never actually have to meet that person directly or, face to face. They can do it over online. We also have to understand that these online platforms, there's a lot of places where, criminal entrepreneurs, traffickers, pimps are looking for those vulnerabilities in our youth or vulnerabilities of community members that might be experiencing homelessness, financial problems, substance abuse, love, maybe physical, mental, emotional disabilities there or challenges. And so, as people or young youth talk about that online, that's where traffickers are going to lure them. And so, with our work, we want to make sure that we're providing this information and training not only to those industry sectors, but ensuring that, parents that have their youth that are utilizing the city transit systems or buses or other community members are aware of this information and how human exploitation happens. That it's not just something that we see on TV or TV shows or movies that are kind of portray misrepresentation of what trafficking looks like. Because as we know, oftentimes these individuals are exploited in plain sight, right in front of everybody. Oftentimes, we know we've heard from individuals that go into a truck stop there. They oftentimes seem like they're by themselves. Maybe they're dressed inappropriate for the weather. Maybe they're going inside to escape their buyer or trafficker for a few moments, and they have that time to alone sitting in that bathroom and maybe see that victim-centered poster. Or maybe that front store clerk sees some indicators that are representing, potential exploitation or human trafficking, and they have an opportunity and a plan in place to either call local law enforcement or resources. And so, we are seeing a huge change and shift, especially within the transportation and trucking industries. So, in response to the realities that this crime does exist, in response to the realities that oftentimes in these industries, in male-dominated industries, that there has been some toxic masculinity, that does spread and play a role there. So we really want to insert this conversation in these industries, in particular, because of their demographic, because they really have the opportunity to spread like fire. As we think about, the demand aspect. The boys will be boys having conversations in the locker rooms, the jokes we typically used to make. Those caused a lot of harm. The continuum of violence there, those jokes, those derogatory comments lead down to someone maybe going online and looking at pornography. And maybe that desensitizes them and they go further to, engaging in commercial sex online. And then maybe that has, desensitized them and encouraged them to actually go out in your community and engage in commercial sex. Well, they're traffickers and criminal entrepreneurs that are going to have to fill that demand and either force, harm, coerce an individual to be able to meet that need. And so, if we can ensure that these frontline workers are informed about the harms that those behaviors have, we can have a huge impact in some of these communities where transportation, logistics, and energy happens. We work at oftentimes in other areas. I think about our indigenous rural communities out there where we have a lot of oil and gas exploitation in places like Wyoming, North Dakota, Texas, where you have large groups of male dominated workers that are going to these rural communities for work. And oftentimes they're alone. And so, if they're used to this type of behavior, or if they've been encouraged by maybe a father figure or other friends and peer pressure to engage in this, when they're in these communities, what are they going to do? They're going to get online and they're going to kind of search for this type of thing, or they're going to drive into town and they're going to look for a massage parlor or a strip club. And so we really want to change that. And so as part of our work at Truckers Against Trafficking, we look to, and our main core thing is to provide free training. So usually a 15 or 30-minute training course that can be implemented into onboarding or as a monthly safety meeting. And then digital and printed resources. So that could be for school bus drivers, city bus drivers, long distance drivers, your local ride share. But what we also found was really important was to have the conversation around demand, either for commercial sex or labor trafficking. And so we created our man-to-man campaign regards to addressing demand. And so what this is like any of our other programs in education and awareness. We have a 27-minute video about the cultural conversation about what addressing demand looks like. And so I won't have an opportunity to play this tonight, but Nikki will share that in the chat box there and probably in a follow-up. But I encourage you to watch this video on your own time. It's about 27 minutes long. And it's a great opportunity for cultural conversation to really get things going and talking about, what can we do as individuals and collectively to address demand. So let's talk about some of the things that we can do. Like I said, whether it be an individual, how can we make sure that our actions, our words, and our accountability make a difference? How can we encourage others? And then if we're involved in a faith-based group, a community group, work, a sports league or team, how can we watch maybe that addressing demand video and insert this conversation so we can ensure that other community members, other people in society can really change those normalized beliefs and really put a stop to human exploitation. So, some of the things I'm going to just suggest as an individual. First and foremost, I don't think most people on here are doing that, but don't purchase commercial sex, whether it be in person or going online. And I would really encourage you not to engage in watching pornography. That perpetuates the demand out there. Oftentimes, individuals that are used in the making of pornography there are not there by their own will or their own choice. And then I also talked about some of the harms of pornography. I sit on an organization, on the board of an organization that includes Fight the New Drug, which is an organization that really has conversations around stopping young individuals and community members from watching pornography and the harm that it has. So I encourage people not to engage in that. Really think about your relationships, what it means to be a man. We have steps and questions and other conversational pieces to help people guide about what does authentic masculinity look like versus toxic masculinity. How can we stop some of the jokes and the comments and the words that we used to say in society and really kind of change those things around the workplace or around friends or on the sports bench? You know, how can we encourage our youth, especially our young men, on healthy messages and actions and reactions to relationships, interacting with women or other genders out there? And then where's the opportunity to have conversations with our young women about boundaries and standards that also create healthy messages around sex and sexuality? There's some other things there too. So if you're a business owner, you work in a corporation, you know businesses or corporations out there, there's a number of different ways that they can get involved together and collectively. There's a couple TED Talks out there and ways that businesses can fight trafficking. You can adopt an anti-human trafficking policy with a demand reduction focus. And so what that is, and we do this with many of the companies out there. We want them to insert into their employee handbook that there's a policy on there that says, I will not engage in purchasing commercial sex on company time with company assets. Otherwise, they may lose their job or be terminated. And in some states, we'd work with legislators that if you get arrested and convicted of purchasing commercial sex, you actually lose your CDL license for life. So there's some consequences in engaging that activity. There's some opportunities to encourage individuals and set a tone within those companies that this type of activity won't be accepted. And so simply having someone that says they won't engage in that activity, which does happen oftentimes in transportation, when individuals are stopping at a truck stop or maybe they're in town for business, they're more than likely or oftentimes on company time or using company assets. And so what a great way to insert some of these resources so they won't engage in that. And then, how about if you're involved in, like I said, a men's group or a faith-based group? This is a great opportunity to, say one night instead of, or even if like say a book club, say tonight we're going to watch this video, or we're going to break out the popcorn, have some drinks, watch this video, and then we have a series of questions to have this conversation around, what can we do? How can we support others? How can we insert the conversation about addressing demand in our everyday life, not even necessarily as it relates to transportation or energy, but how can we go about our days with the forethought of like, hey, if I can make sure that I can have one opportunity to insert this conversation, can you imagine that person who had heard that? Maybe they're going to say that to a few other people. And I truly believe, but if the more we can have the conversation that we're having tonight, we can really curb things in our society from those that are engaged in this type of activity. So, a couple resources out there. I mentioned that man-to-man campaign video. I really encourage you to watch that. Also on our website at tatnonprofit.org, we have resources for parents. I'm a father of a teenager. I come from male-dominated industries where a lot of that toxic masculinity really was real present. And so it took me a long time to understand about demand, understand about some of these conversation pieces and talking points that we're having. And so I had no clue. And so those resources are out there for folks that want the assistance about having this tough conversation with their kids. We also have a landing page for our man-to-man campaign, which has lists of books that are out there. I was involved in helping with a book called Men Fight for Me that was written by Alan Smith from Saving Innocence in Los Angeles. Great, again, great tool and resource out there that talks about the ways that men can just really have that authentic masculinity and look for ways that we can support and uplift each other instead of causing harm. We also do have printed and digital resources around this topic here. So we have a what we call our wallet card that usually goes with our industry members. It's a simple piece of paper that goes in the pockets, purses, and hands of those frontline workers and community members in your area. It talks about the overlap and the catalyst of demand as it relates to human trafficking, and then really what individuals can do. Sometimes this is just about, being informed. I think a lot of men, and from my experience of working with those in certain industries, is that they didn't have a father figure or a positive influence to tell them about manhood and sexuality. Oftentimes, especially youth these days, they learn about it on the internet or pornography, or they are encouraged by other individuals in unhealthy ways to go to strip clubs to celebrate a promotion or something like that. And so really, it's about educating because once I know, I can share this information with everybody else. And so we also have brochures that are great that can go up in faith-based centers, community centers, transit stops, airports, other transportation hubs in your communities where individuals can see this information and really learn about the realities of what some of these types of behaviors lead to the harm of human trafficking. I mentioned that anti-human trafficking persons policy. Again, what a great way to insert a tool that can make a huge difference, especially as it relates to individuals in the transportation and energy industries. And then I didn't talk about a lot about the labor trafficking, but if you think about all those industries I was talking about, there's a lot of opportunity, and we've historically seen that labor trafficking exists there. And so we've created a guide for those industry partners. So if you think about, ABC landscaping that has trucks and workers and drivers out there, this is a great tool for them to ensure that they're using best practices, that they're not hiring or contracting with individuals that are experiencing exploitation or labor trafficking as well. I mentioned that TED Talk out there by Nikki Clifton for businesses. Again, a great opportunity for corporate businesses, transportation, to insert this conversation there at the workplace if it's appropriate. And then we also have had that video as well as those resources be used in buyer accountability or diversion programs. For those that are attending tonight that may not be aware of these types of programs, these are typically court mandated programs for individuals that have been arrested, waiting charges, or been convicted of purchasing commercial sex. See, oftentimes individuals that are engaging in that activity, they don't understand what they did wrong. They think, well, it's just against the law or whatever, but they don't understand the why. They don't understand the harm that they're causing to an individual, to families, their community. And so that's why we find it important to have that video inserted in some of these programs here. And we've heard great feedback from those that attended of realizing, well, hey, I just thought this was against the law. I didn't really realize that what my actions were doing. I didn't really realize that I have a larger problem in regards to addiction to pornography or commercial sex. And so I really do think that it's a helpful tool. And if you guys have that in your area, please let us know. We'd love to include those resources in any local buyer diversion programs that you have there in North Carolina. And then again, I mentioned those parent resources. I'll ensure that I put these in the chat box, some of these links to our website. But if you go to tatnonprofit.org, you can head to those drop down boxes and find the different programs and resources that'll be available to you. And then one of the last things I just kind of want to mention, as I've been talking about this amazing video that's really well put together, I encourage you, if it's not tonight, sometime over the next few days or this weekend, watch that 27-minute video. You'll really see the impacts that it could potentially have. And so what we're doing this year and over the next few months, especially in the winter months, is hosting a dressing demand watch party. And so what this is, whether you have a coffee shop, your home, maybe a faith-based location, like a church or a mosque, where you can actually play this video in a group setting, and then we have a series of questions that you can talk about as it relates to this cultural conversation. And so if you're interested today, please connect with Nikki, connect with me. My email address will be there, and let us know. We'll send you links to the video as well as some of the other resources and that printing materials so that you can host one of those parties. So you may say, especially as January is coming up, for National Human Trafficking Prevention Month, say, hey, on January 15th, at this coffee shop, we're going to host a demand watch party here and watch that with a group of friends or colleagues or community members and really watch the message resonate in them and make it a lasting impact in the community. And so that was TAT in our Addressing Demand program real quickly. As much as I can talk about it here, the impact of watching that the video really will do more justice. And so, like I said, I encourage you to check out the video, check out our website, and really look at the resources that we have as it relates to combating human trafficking and addressing demand.
Thank you, Louie. I'll leave that up for if you want to put your contact information back up so people can get that. While I ask you a couple of questions, let me pull that up. It says, "Are your member truckers?" I guess it means do your member truckers have anything on the exterior of their trucks to indicate it is a safe place to approach for help?
Awesome question. Yes, we do. So we have a couple stickers. We call them our cab stickers. They usually go on the inside or outside of the cabs of those trucks out there. And the kind of the main thing says, "Do you need help?" And we have what we call every year our Harriet Tubman Award winner. We provide an award, a financial reward, as well as a recognition of a frontline individual or driver out there that has called on behalf of an individual. And so we actually have a few cases where victims of human trafficking have been forced to work a truck stop and they knocked on a cab and saw that sticker there and they knew that was someone that can help them. And Arian Taylor is his name, of the driver, was able to help a victim of human trafficking get out of that situation. So yes, we have those stickers. All of our resources are online. You can order those. You can reach out to me. I can send you. They are free of charge. So if you need any of our resources, check those out and let me know, and I'll be happy to send you those.
That answers another question about you had mentioned putting up posters and display information and ride shares and all that. And it was, how can we get that? So are all of those items online too?
They sure are. Yeah, Nikki.
Awesome.
And I think this is a great opportunity for a task force here, or especially in regards to, addressing demand. I'd be happy to send those that are attending tonight. If you want to, put those in other areas that you might have pamphlets or information in regards to human trafficking awareness. Like I said, these could be great at like airports where they have other information and brochures. What a great place to put that addressing demand brochure for people to see.
So, all right. I have a couple more. So if you have any questions for Louie, you can drop them in the Q&A while I have him answer quickly these other two. So one is you mentioned 14 states have a commercial driver's license. You are required to have the training in order to get your commercial driver's license. And I was wondering if there are any efforts doing that in North Carolina.
Great question. I'd have to look that up. I'm not too sure. I should have
Okay.
before this presentation, but I think that's something that we're continually looking at. I know this for 2026. I think there's some conversation and there's some legislation pieces to add a couple more states on there as well. So we'd be happy to work with our stakeholders. We have close relationships with not only the North Carolina Trucking Association, but also the Petroleum Marketers Association. So these are state associations within the industries that have buy-in to this mission and to this conversation piece. And so if you're interested in doing some of these campaigns, especially as it relates to CDL legislation, let us know. I'm sure we can have the industry support those legislation pieces.
Absolutely. And then a question that said, what do you mean by oil and gas exploitation?
Yeah, so what we see oftentimes, or what we've seen in the industry, is some of those oil and gas sites, say, for instance, we're working in the four corners of the United States, so that Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah. It's a very mineral-rich area there, whether it be oil and gas or other minerals and mining that happens on or near indigenous reservations, in particular there, the Navajo and Ute Reservation. And so what you have is companies like Phillips 66, Marathon Oil, doing extractions with permission, extraction sites to extract some of those resources on or near those reservations. And so that requires, sometimes in these small communities, sending 5, 6, 7,000, industry workers to temporarily work in these areas. Sometimes they've been called man camps. And so what we do see is some of the negative effects of having a large group of men moving into some of these rural areas, where a small percentage of those may engage in commercial sex activity, which means that that might have a negative impact on some of the communities, in particular, like the indigenous communities there. And so that's what I'm meaning by some of the oil and gas, the exploitation that happens from that industry there. And what we've seen is that they care about the communities that they work in. These oil and gas companies, they do care about. Oftentimes, they actually have representatives on their staff that ensure that he minimizes those impacts within the communities that they're trying to support, and bring economic resources and energy resources to. And so as part of that, as part of it working with us, is to insert this conversation around that, to ensure that if they're going to set up a site where they're going to have a number of industry workers there, can they have a day in their onboarding training where they play that video as it relates to addressing demand? Because now what you'll have is you'll have this whole new group of industry workers that know about this type of activity and the harm that it creates on those communities that they're visiting and working at.
Okay, thank you for educating us on that. I think that was, oh, we've got a lot in the chat. Let me just take a quick glance. It seems that some of our attendees in the western part of the country are familiar with the exploitation you're talking about at Farmington and Navajo
Mhm.
reservations. There's a question, which states take the CDL license of folks who are arrested for buying sex? I don't know if
That
you
is,
know that. Hey, sorry to put
yeah.
you on the spot.
No, that's a great question, and I again probably should have had that off the top of my head. I'll have to look that up. I know it kind of varies and depends on there, and I know there was potentially a move to make that nationwide. I don't know where that's at, but I'm happy to research that and follow that up, and maybe I can do that while the other speaker is talking, but just kind of finding where those states are. Because again, I think that is a big deterrent for individuals that will not engage in that activity if it means they might lose their livelihood.
And Pam did drop in the chat the man-to-man campaign website and the addressing demand video. You mentioned a lot about the addressing demand video. Of course, it's too long to play here, but if we do want to share that, what can we expect to see? Are these, restored buyers or?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, it's a group of men that get on this video here and kind of talk about their perspective of kind of the influences they had as young men and some of those negative influences, and then really trying to understand some of those, like I said, normalized beliefs, common practices, common actions in the past, and how those caused harm. And so you hear from different men, industry men that are from the industry. Hear from Walmart drivers that have been for 25 years. You hear from a few therapists and psychologists, including someone that was a former buyer or someone that was addicted to pornography, and kind of hear from their perspective about the harm that that causes there. And really kind of talks about dispelling some of the myths about, making jokes, how we put each other down, the types of words that we use, gender violence there, and really kind of talks about this is an opportunity not to shame men, not to, make them feel bad, but really how can we uplift, in particular men, around this conversation to ensure that we're really shining a light and having that authentic masculinity? How can we not burn down the world and cause a lot of harm out there, but really how can we can uplift people? So, again, I think that the movie really kind of explains itself as you kind of hear this conversation around this message there, but it's super powerful, and we've heard great feedback on the impacts it's had for those that have watched it.
I look forward to seeing that. It sounds perfect, like you were saying, for a men's group,
Hmm.
especially like a men's church group.
Be perfect, yeah.
Um, I believe that is all. We had a question. Would any state that has an oil plant be a big place. California or Houston. And actually she's probably talking about the oil and gas exploitation.
Yeah, we see that in just about every state. You'd even think some of the states, the smaller states on the East Coast, they still have, whether it be, coal mining in the Virginias to other oil and gas that happens on the coastal areas of the Carolinas. Again, all those frontline industry workers really have this role to play. And so we see this as an opportunity to ensure that they're not only receiving our anti-human trafficking resources, but we want to make sure that we're also adding that addressing demand conversation piece in the work that we do.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you so much, Louie. I could sit and ask you questions all day and learn. So I appreciate you coming and sharing your expertise with us. Um, we are now going to move on to Miss Nellie Rodriguez. So Nellie, let's see, there she is. So Nellie Marcos. Nellie, you've worked with the Coalition of Immokalee Workers for over 16 years.
Nelly, usted han trabajado con la coalición de trabajadores de Immokalee por más de 16 años.
Sí,
Uh,
yes, buenas
yeah,
noches.
Yes,
you
that's right.
coordinate the women's group, you're a radio host, an educator.
Tú coordinas las juntas de mujeres, tú trabajas en la radio, tú haces el trabajo de educación.
Sí,
And
aquí
you
hacemos,
organize, I'm sorry,
ajá,
go ahead.
perdón, sí, digo, nada más hacemos, sí, de todo nos toca hacer, no tenemos un nombramiento oficial, sino que hacemos de todo.
Yep, that's how we do it. Here, nobody has a specific role. We get involved in everything.
Yeah, I see she's also organized the National Wendy's boycott and was recognized with a Woman of Courage Award by the UN Women's Advocacy Group. It's amazing and what motivates you to do
Y
this?
yo veo que también usted um, han coordinado el boicot nacional de Wendy's y también um, fue premiada con el premio de Mujer de Valor del UN, de la advocacia de mujeres. Yo quiero saber o qué te motiva a hacer esto.
Ujú. Sí, esto es verdad. Dieron el premio a uno de los cuatro valores de Roosevelt en el 2016. No, no recuerdo el año exactamente. Pero sí, eso es una de las cosas que nos han dado por el trabajo que ha hecho la coalición, ¿no? En proteger los derechos humanos de los trabajadores.
Yes, that's right. I have received that award on behalf of our organization, and that is for our work in advocating for workers' rights.
Y una de las cosas que es importante también es ver cómo era antes la situación para los trabajadores agrícolas, porque esta área de aquí de Immokalee, de la Florida, esa es una área de mucha industria, mucho compañías agrícolas, ¿verdad? Y entonces lo que no se conocía de esto era que Immokalee era conocido como la tierra cero para la esclavitud moderna y el trabajo forzado.
Yes, that's right. And for understanding our work, it's very helpful to understand how our community here in Immokalee used to be. This is a community that's very involved and it's a major part of the agricultural industry. And at one point, back when we first started organizing, it was referred to as ground zero for modern day slavery and forced labor.
Y ver ahora los cambios que se han logrado con el trabajo de la coalición, eso es lo más importante. Que ha llegado esos cambios para millones de trabajadores agrícolas que no nada más están protegidos con este programa aquí en lo que es la agricultura de muchas frutas y vegetales, sino que también ahora se ha expandido a otros países que están usando el modelo de responsabilidad social dirigida por trabajadores para aplicarlo en sus trabajos y poder tener ellos también más respeto y dignidad.
Yes, and our work And the changes that our work and our organizing has gotten is what is the most important thing that we'd like to center on and focus on, because our work has led to a program that has helped thousands of workers, not only in the US, but worldwide as well. And we've created a model of social responsibility called the worker-driven social responsibility model that protects workers in a variety of industry. And though we started here in Immokalee, which is mostly a tomato industry, it has expanded to many different fruits and vegetables all over the country and other industries as well in other places in the world.
Entonces, no nada más es como decir que te motiva las campañas o que te motiva que te den un premio, te motiva lo que ves, lo que es realidad de lo que está hoy viviendo los trabajadores. Con el programa que ha creado la coalición, gracias a las 14 corporaciones que hemos traído a la mesa del diálogo, como usted dice, Wendy no es parte del programa. Tenemos todavía la campaña con Wendy's, con Kroger. Tenemos un boicot, de hecho, con Wendy's, pero eso no es como, solamente no es eso, sino que son las cosas buenas, las cosas positivas que nos han logrado parar la esclavitud en el trabajo gracias a la educación que hacemos de trabajador a trabajador. Nos han logrado parar el robo de salario, que era una de las cosas que nos afectaba mucho a los trabajadores en los años 90, el acoso sexual con las mujeres, que también gracias a este programa se ha parado.
Yes. And what motivates me and what motivates our organization is not to become famous or to receive awards, but it's to really see the changes that we are making. In fact, with the 14 organizations, these huge corporations like Burger King, Walmart, McDonald's, Chipotle, Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, all of these corporations that have joined the Fair Food Program have helped us make these changes. And unfortunately, as you mentioned, corporations like Wendy's are still not part of the Fair Food Program, which means that workers in their food chain could still be being abused and could still be being trafficked. But we continue with our Wendy's boycott in a way to show Wendy's that we would like them to come to the table and become a part of the Fair Food Program. In addition, Kroger, which is a big grocery store chain that's growing a lot, is also not part of the Fair Food Program, and we're going to talk a little bit about some cases that have been linked to Kroger. But yes, our work and the farms that are part of the Fair Food Program have really eliminated slavery in the workplace. We have tackled wage theft, which was a huge problem in the 90s when we originally started organizing. And we've put a stop to sexual harassment and sexual violence of women in the workplace as well.
Ujú. Y también muchas de las cosas que hemos visto es, por ejemplo, la confianza que se ha logrado con los trabajadores. Hemos llevado ahorita hasta la fecha más de 12 casos de que hemos trabajado de esclavitud moderna, de trabajo forzado dentro de la industria agrícola. Recientemente, el año pasado, apenas se logró cerrar, de hecho ya está cerrado, uno de los casos más grandes de trabajo forzado dentro de la agricultura. Es el caso que pasó en Georgia, muy cerca de aquí, de trabajadores contratados que fueron traídos con este programa, ¿no? De visa H2A, pero se convirtieron en uno de los casos más grandes donde eran abusados, eran golpeados, amenazados con pistola, encerrados por una familia que los traía a Estados Unidos a trabajar en la cebolla, pero de ahí, pues ellos sufrían, ¿no? De muchos abusos más. ¿Quieres tú decirlo?
Mhm. And since the beginning of our work, we have worked with over 12 cases of modern day slavery and forced labor. And recently we've helped work with one of the biggest cases ever uncovered in the agriculture industry that happened in Georgia, not too far from where we are here in Florida. And that actually included H-2A workers. And H-2A workers have a visa to come and work legally in the United States for short periods of time. So they were here legally, but they were still open to be exploited, and they ended up being in one of the biggest cases of modern day slavery and forced labor, where many people were hurt, exploited, threatened, and abused.
Ujú. Y este caso es uno de los casos donde se acaba apenas de declarar culpable el último de los acusados o de los patrones que estaban haciendo fraude mediante lo que era el programa de visas y de taxas, donde esta era una familia grande que incluía como más de 24 personas que fueron involucrados en los arrestos que se hicieron apenas en noviembre del año pasado. Se hicieron los arrestos después de que nosotros como organización trabajamos mucho para ir a buscar a hablar con los trabajadores, crear confianza con ellos, buscar los ranchos, los lugares donde supuestamente los tenían en las viviendas, hacer todo la investigación, hacer todo el caso. Y después de que teníamos todo esto junto, todos los detalles, los contratos, los ranchos, ir y venir de Florida a Georgia, por fin se logró tener el caso, pudimos hacer que el Departamento de Justicia nos ayudara para que esto se llevara ante pues, las autoridades correspondientes. Y fueron más de 24 patrones que se arrestaron en un día porque este caso incluía también a alrededor de 77,000 trabajadores que se habían traído desde el 2015 a la fecha. Esta familia era una familia muy grande que había logrado sacar ganancia de más de 200 millones de dólares del fraude de las visas.
Yes, and this big case that we worked with was in the onion industry. The workers were part of the onion agricultural industry. And recently, the last boss was officially found guilty, partly of fraud in the H-2A visa program and the taxes, and this huge case of forced labor and modern day slavery. It was a very large group of people that were committing these crimes. It was over 24 different people, and they started to be tried back in November of last year, November 2024. Our job as the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, our job was to go to the workers, to gain trust and confidence with them, to talk to them, to hear their story, to visit many of the places where they were living and where these abuses were happening, and to help investigate and uncover a lot of what was going on in this case. And once we were able to get everything together, get the details together, the contracts, find out what farms were involved, we were able to then compile all this for the Department of Justice to build their case. And we found that over 24 bosses were included in this case. And since 2015, when this started, 77,000 workers were involved in one way or another in this case. And the amount of money that had been made was over 200 million.
Ujú. Entonces, esto es una de las cosas, ¿verdad? Que a veces a uno le da satisfacción y le anima para, como dice usted, para seguir adelante y haciendo ese trabajo, porque ve, ¿verdad? Que con el apoyo de las corporaciones hemos podido también proteger a miles de trabajadores que sigan cayendo en manos de patrones que ahora sí tienen una responsabilidad. Y eso es algo que nosotros habíamos buscado por mucho tiempo que hubiera esas protecciones y esos derechos para los trabajadores.
And yes, that's the sort of thing that animates us and motivates us to continue doing our work. especially what we have done to work alongside the corporations that are supplying from these from farms in the agricultural industry, and to make sure that the farms that they are supplying from are farms that are working to protect their workers and protect the rights of their workers.
Ujú. Entonces, todo esto se ha logrado, como le dije, gracias al programa de comida justa que hemos creado por la presión que hemos logrado hacer con los consumidores. Se ha creado, ¿verdad?, la campaña por comida justa con el apoyo de las corporaciones, la gente de fe, los estudiantes, que hemos concientizado que tienen un gran poder como consumidores. Ellos pueden no decidir si apoyan a una corporación que apoya la lucha de los trabajadores o da su dinero a una corporación que quiere seguir apoyando para que ese productor siga teniendo a trabajadores en este tipo de condiciones como trabajo forzado, el robo de dinero y que siga pasando el acoso con las mujeres y la esclavitud moderna.
And yes, these are just some of the successes that we have been able to achieve through our Fair Food program, which protects workers. And the reason why we have that program today is in large part because of the pressure that consumers, regular people, have helped us put on these corporations to join the Fair Food program. And that has been through our campaign for fair food. And with this campaign, we have worked alongside people of faith, students, and other people of consciousness to ask these corporations to supply their food from farms that protect workers and don't let these abuses happen. And so we have conscientized, what's the word?
Conciencia,
Conscience, yes,
concientizar.
conscientizar. We have created consciousness. There we go. I'll go that way. We have created consciousness with consumers that they can choose to spend their money with a corporation that chooses to protect their workers and to give their workers dignity and respect and the rights that they deserve, or to use their money to buy from companies that get their supplies from workers that live in bad conditions, that could be being abused, that could be part of a modern day slavery case or forced labor, like the Blooming Onion case that we mentioned, or where women, female workers, are still being sexually harassed and sexually abused. And so it's important that we create that consciousness in the consumers that they choose where they're spending their money with corporations that do or don't protect their workers.
Ujú. Porque tenemos el programa de comida justa, cómo funciona, es que son acuerdos legales que se han hecho entre las corporaciones y los productores de frutas y vegetales y la coalición. Y esto es algo, ¿verdad?, que nos dio a nosotros la idea desde los años 90 atrás, cuando los abusos pasaban, el robo de salario pasaba, el abuso con las mujeres pasaba. ¿Y qué hacían las corporaciones? Las corporaciones solamente venían, compraban su tomate, compraban por mayoreo, le pagaban por mayoreo a los rancheros, y los rancheros solamente aseguraban pues sacar su inversión de lo que ellos invertían en los productos, y no había nada para el trabajador. No había ni un pago digno porque los salarios se habían estado estancados por más de 30 años. Ellos nada más sacaban su propia ganancia y no se fijaban hacia abajo, hacia el trabajador que recibía toda esa presión para poder ser posible que los rancheros cumplieran con la demanda que tenían para las corporaciones. Por eso nosotros empezamos a ver que el poder la tenían las corporaciones, y el poder de las corporaciones agarran el poder del consumidor.
And so the way that our Fair Food program works is that it is legal agreements that are signed and are a team effort with these major corporations that I mentioned earlier, like McDonald's and Walmart, the coalition of Immokalee workers, our organization, and the farms where those corporations are supplying their fruits and vegetables from. And so, a long time ago, before we had the Fair Food Program, when corporations were looking here and looking to buy from these farms, they weren't worried about whether wage theft was happening, whether workers were being abused, whether female workers were being harassed, or whether there was modern day slavery. And that was a time when really there was no dignified wage, and workers were on the bottom feeling all the pressure from the crew leaders on top, and then the farms on top of that, and then the corporations all the way at the top. And so, what really helped us come to the successes that we have today is when we realized that the corporations are up above the farms and have a lot of power to demand. And even on top of the corporations are the consumers, regular everyday people that spend their money that are able to have more power over these corporations even.
Ujú. Entonces, podemos poner el video y hablar un poco más cómo explica lo del programa de comida.
And so now we're going to share a video and then we'll explain a little bit more about how the Fair Food Program works.
"5:30 a.m. in Immokalee, Florida. It's a dark morning under an overcast sky as Alejandrina Carrera begins the 40-minute walk to her sister's house to drop off her 2 small children. It's too early for them to go to school, and they're too young to stay home alone. But Alejandrina has a bus to catch. Every day, hundreds of migrant farm workers, like Alejandrina, come to this parking lot in the center of town, where they board old school buses that take them to the fields. Hey. Alejandrina picks tomatoes on a farm about 30 minutes away. She likes her job now and says she's treated with respect. But it wasn't always that way. Alejandrina came to Immokalee from Mexico more than 20 years ago. She was alone, just 14 years old, small, scared, and extremely vulnerable. She says it didn't take long for someone to take advantage of her. It happened at one of the first farms she worked at. She says her boss promised her a better job in a warehouse. But as soon as she got in his truck, he drove to a remote part of the farm, and she knew she was in trouble.
He told me if we don't do this the easy way, we'll do it the hard way. I was afraid and trembling. He tried to abuse me sexually, but he didn't get to because another worker heard me screaming and came to help me. The next day, the boss fired us both.
Agricultural workers are without a doubt the most vulnerable workers in the United States, and I would say across the world.
John S. Forms is co-owner of Sunripe Certified Brands, where Alejandrina works today.
Let's talk about reality here. This is farming. This is agriculture. Agriculture has, from the very early days of man farming and needing to have work, has been full of opportunities for abuse.
His family-owned farm is one of the largest in the U.S. and was the first to join the Fair Food Program, an innovative initiative that has been held up as the most comprehensive social responsibility program in U.S. agriculture. Today, nearly every farm in Florida has signed on. The program combines a set of high standards that includes monitoring the farms and educating the workers.
Buenos días.
Leonel Perez works for the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, or CIW, a nonprofit organization that developed the Fair Food Program. Today, CIW is holding a training session with farm workers, teaching them not only what rights they have, but what to do when those rights are violated. Lionel and the other educators here have firsthand knowledge because they are all former migrant farm workers themselves.
The most important thing for me is to be able to talk to other workers because I have a shared experience. I work in the fields too, and now we can work together to end worker abuse.
The Fair Food Program works because it has market consequences. If a farm violates the code of conduct, it is suspended from the program and cannot sell to participating buyers, which includes some of the biggest fast food restaurants and grocery stores. It all makes a big difference for those at the bottom of the supply chain, like Alejandrina.
You can work freely. You're not going to be harassed. You're not going to be insulted. You're not going to be forced to work. There's more respect now.
These days, Alejandrina wakes up in the morning happy to come to work, proud to talk to her kids about the company she works for. And that, she says, is the biggest change of all. Amaryl Walker, CNN.
Ujú. Sí, pues eso es como ahorita el impacto, ¿no? que está causando el programa de comida justa para los miles de trabajadores aquí en la industria. Y como ven ahí en el video, se muestra cómo se hace la educación de trabajador a trabajador, donde se habla sobre el derecho que tienen de recibir la plática. Ahora los rancheros pagan al trabajador por recibir esta plática sobre sus derechos. Y es como hablamos de cómo pueden ellos reconocer cuando están siendo víctimas de trabajo forzado. Hay todo un tema que explicamos cómo se ve la esclavitud, porque a veces decimos que el trabajo de la agricultura es sucio y es pesado y está bajo el sol, pero esas son las condiciones normales. Los casos extremos es como cuando te maltratan, cuando te tienen privado de tu libertad, no te dejan comunicar con la familia, o que el patrón usa armas para amenazar o intimidar al trabajador, o le quita los documentos cuando vienen con su visa. Eso se le explica al trabajador y ellos saben que tienen el derecho de hacer una queja sin miedo a las represalias.
Yes, and so that video showed the impact of the Fair Food Program and how it's affecting thousands of workers in the industry. And you saw an example there of a worker-to-worker worker-to-worker education session where workers get educated on their rights, and the farm actually pays for their time during the session. For the 45 minutes to an hour that they spend in there, they're paid. And it helps us create consciousness in the workers on how to recognize if they are being victimized, if they're being a victim of forced labor, how they can keep an eye out and spot modern day slavery for themselves and others. And we always say, yes, the work of agriculture, it's can be dirty, it can be difficult, it can be hot days out there in the sun. But that's quite different from when you actually have cases of forced labor where many times workers are being threatened with weapons, they're not allowed to leave, they're not allowed to contact their families, they've had their documents taken away by the bosses. And so that's something that we explain to the workers on how they can be conscious of whether they're being affected and forced to work and what they can do if they realize that that's the situation that they're in, that they have the opportunity in the Fair Food Program to call and make a complaint without fear of retaliation.
Ujú. Sí, existe una línea de quejas que funciona las 24 horas del día y los 7 días de la semana y es manejado por un tercer partido, que ellos son los investigadores, los que toman las quejas, los que hablan con las compañías y los que tienen el derecho también de pues, como se dice, castigar o sancionar a los ranchos cuando está pasando un problema y que ellos no dan la solución inmediata. Entonces, ellos reciben las llamadas y la educación se hace en español, en criol y en inglés.
And part of the Fair Food Program is that we have a 24/7 complaint line, and that complaint line is monitored by a third-party organization, the Fair Food Standards Council. And the same people that monitor that complaint line, they are also the auditors that are visiting every single farm in the Fair Food Program. They're talking to 50% of the workers, they're talking to the corporations, and they have the power to provide real consequences to farms that are not treating their workers by the code of conduct and for not providing solutions if there is a problem. And so
En criol,
these education sessions are provided in Spanish, in English, and in Haitian Creole so that workers can receive the education in their own language.
Ujú. Entonces, esto es algo, ¿verdad? De que también no nada más hablamos como su derecho de trabajar libre de esclavitud moderna y que conozcan cómo es esclavitud, sino también explicamos como el derecho de recibir el salario, la responsabilidad que tiene hoy la compañía o el rancho, de que si hay un problema con el salario, ellos tienen que atenderlo inmediatamente, que eso ya se ha parado por el robo de salario que existía hace años atrás, lo que es también el derecho de trabajar libre de acoso sexual. Se les explica a las mujeres qué es acoso sexual, cómo se ve, el derecho de que ellas son libres de reportar aún al propio patrón, al propio contratista. Hay consecuencias hoy en día con el programa de comida justa para cualquier persona, no importa si es el chofer o es el supervisor de la compañía. Hoy hay consecuencias y se da el ejemplo de que ya los rancheros, los dueños de las compañías, han despedido a sus supervisores o han despedido a sus contratistas porque pensaban que este programa era fácil de violarlo sin ninguna consecuencia y hay ranchos que han tenido que despedir a estas personas, aunque tuvieran más de 20 años, 30 años, ¿verdad? Que son parte del rancho. Pero es que así funciona el programa y así se tiene que hacer.
Yes, and so we educate workers that they are free to work from from forced labor and modern day slavery, that they have a right to receive their wages, that if there is a problem with the salary, they can call the complaint line without fear of being fired or being retaliated, and that those complaints will be resolved as fast as possible, and that during those education sessions, we also talk to the workers about sexual harassment, specifically the female workers, that they can feel free to report if that is something that's happening to them, and that they can report anyone, and that there will be consequences for that person who is committing that harassment, whether it be just one of the bus drivers or even a supervisor. And what we have seen is that these farms have fired supervisors and crew leaders that had worked for over 20 or 30 years in the company. But and maybe they thought it was easy to be part of the program that truly does protect workers, but they've realized that there really are consequences and they really do need to abide by this code of conduct and protect these workers from sexual harassment, sexual abuse, or whatever it may be.
Ujú. Entonces, eso es como funciona el programa ahorita y este programa que se empezó aquí en la Florida y que era solamente para los trabajadores del tomate, gracias al poder que tienen las corporaciones, hoy en día estamos ya en 32 estados de Estados Unidos, incluyendo desde Florida a las Carolinas, New Jersey, Tennessee, Virginia, Colorado, a Oregon, Kentucky. Son 34 estados donde está el programa de comida justa, gracias al poder de las corporaciones. Y es así también como nos han llegado algunas quejas de otros trabajadores que no son de los ranchos del programa, pero que aún así tomamos nosotros las quejas de los trabajadores y algunos por conocer el programa hemos podido ayudar a trabajadores que son víctimas también de trabajo forzado o de otro tipo de abusos en otros ranchos que no son del programa, pero también tenemos como otros productos, puedes agregarlo tú.
Yes, and so we see that this program, which originally just started here in Florida and just in the tomato industry, has expanded with the power of consumers and the corporations that have supported the program. And now we are in about 23 states in the United States, including the Carolinas, Tennessee, New Jersey, Oregon, Kentucky. And we have even been able to help workers in other farms outside of the Fair Food Program who just from hearing about the Fair Food Program, or maybe they knew somebody that worked at a Fair Food Program farm, that they were able to then reach out to us for help, and so that we could put a stop to this modern day slavery or this forced labor that was happening to workers, even those outside the Fair Food Program.
Entonces puedes incluir lo de que quieres, lo que, o si tiene preguntas, porque
Yes, Dudo?
yo creo que sí. Faltaba más agregar un poquito sobre WSR, pero no sé si tengas preguntas.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so that's the main things that we wanted to mention. If you would like, we can talk a little bit more about the WSR model, the worker-driven social responsibility model, and how that's expanded beyond the agriculture industry. Or we could move into a question and answer period as well.
We do have a few questions. One is, how do we know if a corporation is a part of the Fair Food Program?
¿Cómo sabemos si una corporación es parte del programa de comida justa? Yo puedo poner, sí.
¿Dónde están los que están ahí?
I can share my screen, and what I'm about to share is a PDF of the state of the program report, which has a lot of information on the Fair Food Program in general, and it has a page that shows a map of all the different states and countries that we have expanded into, and all of the corporations that are part of the Fair Food Program. So I will share that now.
Wonderful.
So here you can see on the left, we have the Fair Food Program, and you can see the different states that we are a part of, that we have expanded into, that have Fair Food Program farms. And I'll zoom in a little bit. You can also see the different crops. So you'll see that we have many tomato farms. The ones that have like these bundles of vegetables are multi-veg farms that have multiple different crops in the same farm. You can see that we have flowers over in California. We have some different tulip farms over here in this area as well. We have sweet potato here in North Carolina. We have also been working with other countries like Chile and South Africa and expanding into their tulip industries, as well as the UK fishing industry has worked with us in the past to adapt the worker-driven social responsibility model to their fishing industry, in which workers face a lot of similar abuses. And then here you can see the major corporations that are part of the Fair Food Program that buy from Fair Food Program farms. So some of these, like Ahold, Aramark, and Bon Appetit, are food distribution companies. So you may have not heard of them, but a lot of them supply to universities, to hospitals, things like that. And then we have some major fast food companies like Burger King, McDonald's. We have restaurants like Chipotle. And so these are the major corporations that you would recognize that are part of the Fair Food Program.
And if I'm not mistaken, Ahold is Food Lion as well, right? I think they own Food Lion.
I think that sounds right.
Yeah, because we have
Yeah.
a Food Lion here, and I remember studying that. So, and I believe Pam has been busy putting the different North Carolina farms in the Airmark does concessions at ECU. Okay, that I believe Pam has been busy putting the different farms in North Carolina that are part of the Fair Food Program in the chat if you guys are interested in seeing that, along with the buyers that he just mentioned. So another question was, you mentioned the campaign for fair food. How can we put pressure on corporations to be a part of the Fair Food Program?
¿Cómo podemos presionar las corporaciones para entrar en el programa de comida justa?
Bueno, tenemos como ahorita les digo, hay campañas con Wendy's, que es una de las corporaciones que no son parte del programa de comida justa y sabe, ¿verdad? Del programa, porque anteriormente Wendy's compraba de los ranchos que están aquí en la Florida, compraba sus tomates. Cuando empezamos a presionarlo con la campaña y se lanzó el boicot, ha hecho muchos como pretextos, ha dicho diferentes cosas, pero una manera que estamos pidiendo a los consumidores es precisamente como no hay oportunidad de ir a mandar a veces hacemos campañas por línea, estamos haciendo algunas cosas por línea, mandar una carta para los ejecutivos de Wendy's o también muchas de las veces pueden dejar su contacto y nosotros podemos mandar como diferentes informaciones cuando tengamos alguna campaña. Es la manera en que ahorita lo estamos haciendo. Y si quieres explicar un poquito.
Yes. So the best way to put pressure on these companies to join the Fair Food Program is to support the campaigns that we have. Like, for example, our campaign for Wendy's to join the Wendy's to join the Fair Food Program, since it's one of the major fast food chains that still hasn't joined. And the funny thing is, like, Wendy's knows we exist. We've been campaigning for them to join for a long time, and they actually used to buy their tomatoes from Florida farms. But once the Fair Food Program started to really take root here, they actually decided to shift where they get their tomatoes from. And I believe now they get them from farms in Mexico, where there is even more opportunity for modern day slavery and abuses. And we've asked them to join many times. They have given many excuses. And so we continue to campaign and have consumers support us in reaching out to them. And so that takes part in a few different ways. One of the ways that we've been organizing recently is to do virtual day of actions where we get together and we all send emails together on the same day to Wendy's or Kroger asking them to join the Fair Food Program. In the past, we have asked consumers to send letters to executives, to shareholders, since they're the ones with the decision-making power. Another way that you can become a part of the campaign is to sign up for our newsletter to get updates and hear about actions that we're taking to get these corporations to join the Fair Food Program. And what I can put now in the chat is a link to our Linktree. And Linktree is a website that has a few different links organized. And on that webpage, you will see a link to sign up for the newsletter, a link to become a sustaining donor and support financially, or you could just from there already send an email to Wendy's or Kroger. So I'm going to pull up that link and send it in the chat now.
And the last question I see is, oh, actually, there's two more. Do you work with law enforcement to be able to legally enforce exploitation, the laws for exploitation? Do you ever partner with law enforcement?
Sí, hemos trabajado con los policías para parar la explotación.
Sí, esa es buena pregunta porque ahorita, como les dije, van más de 12 casos de esclavitud moderna que la coalición ha logrado sacar a la luz. Pero en los años 90, especialmente cuando se comenzó a hacer la lucha aquí, organizar en la comunidad, salió uno de los primeros casos en el 97, cuando se tenía que buscar quién pudiera ayudar a la coalición para que este caso se llevara ante el Departamento de Justicia. Y no había en aquel entonces, no sabían cómo se podía trabajar este caso, porque nunca habían tenido un caso de esclavitud moderna con trabajadores de la agricultura. Entonces, la coalición en aquellos años se tuvo que a trabajar junto con el Departamento de Policía de aquí, de Florida, para trabajar juntos con ellos y enseñar que la esclavitud existía aquí mismo, en nuestra comunidad, en los mismos ranchos donde la comunidad trabajaba. Y era bien difícil para que un trabajador dijera que estaba pasando por un caso de esclavitud o que se reconociera que había ese problema dentro de la comunidad, porque los policías no sabían que existía ese tipo de abusos. Después de que la coalición empezó a ayudar como a trabajar con ellos y enseñarles, darles como ah, ¿cómo se dice?
Entrenamiento.
Entrenamiento de cómo son cómo suceden los casos de esclavitud, cómo los patrones anteriormente tenían controlado a los trabajadores, ellos les daban renta, ellos los movían de un estado a otro, dentro de camiones escondidos, y ahí mismo ellos vivían. Pasó un caso aquí cerca en Immokalee así. Entonces, el policía, ya de ser un policía, a veces al trabajador le da miedo acercarse a un policía. Por eso se tuvo que entrenar la manera en que cómo ellos tenían que ganar confianza, cómo poder identificar a un trabajador cuando estaba pasando por una situación de trabajo forzado. Sí se trabajó con ellos y es gracias a eso, ¿verdad? Que ahora hemos podido trabajar junto con el Departamento de Policía y que ahora ya se ha podido tener también el apoyo del Age, el Departamento de
Homeland
Social
Security.
Security y el
Homeland
Departamento de
Security.
Labor, ajá. Para esos casos que hemos sacado ya últimamente, ya se ha podido llevar esos casos con más rápido, no tanto como quisiéramos, pero se ha
Mhm.
podido trabajar.
Yes, that's a great question because, as we mentioned earlier, we have been involved in bringing to light over a dozen cases of modern day slavery in the agriculture industry. And back in the 90s, when we first started organizing and when we first started seeing these cases, for example, there was a case in 1997, and we were thinking, who could help us? How can we get this to the Department of Justice? And at that time, people did not know that these cases were happening, that modern day slavery was a thing that was happening in the agriculture industry. And police wasn't the people that work in the in law enforcement also were not aware that this could happen, because there had really been no cases of slavery in agriculture that had been brought to light. And so, yes, at those very beginning stages, we did work very closely with the police department, and we created consciousness and got them to understand that this was happening. And that led to us working with them in order to train them more on the different ways that you could tackle a modern day slavery case. And that includes how to track and investigate what was happening. Like, for example, paying attention to how workers were being transported. A lot of them were being taken in trucks from one state to another to work on different farms, and paying attention to things like that, as well as we trained the police in ways that they could gain trust with workers, because the workers tended to be very scared to talk to police, to approach police. And so we worked with them in being able to gain trust with workers in order to be able to hear the stories of these workers and what they were experiencing. And also we trained the police in identifying the clues, that a worker might be being part of modern day slavery or forced labor. And that eventually led us to work with the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Labor, and today, compared to back in the 90s, all this training and all this consciousness has led to these cases being resolved much faster. It's not as fast as we'd like it to be, but it's much faster than it used to be, and we definitely are miles from where we started in the 90s.
Thank you. I just realized we're over time. So thank you everyone for sticking with us. Nellie and Marcos, wow, the work you do is so important. And thank you for the work you do and for coming tonight and sharing about it with us. So yeah, it's time to wrap up. That's the end of our webinar series. We hope that you have learned a lot, but not only have you learned a lot, but that you are empowered now to act, to advocate for legislation, to speak up and change the culture, to educate others on the devastating impact that buyers have on victims, and to join the discussion about the demand reduction in all the ways that were discussed tonight. I'm going to share my screen one last time here. Let's see. Really quick here. I want to give you our coordinator's information. Oh, let's skip along. There we go. So yeah, so this is our, well, see if I can do that one.
Human trafficking.
There we go. All right. So this is Haley Merkel. She's our task force coordinator. Her email address for if you wanted to learn more about the task force or to learn how you can join the demand reduction effort, please reach out to us. We would love, now that you are educated, we would love to show you how to take action and have you partner with us. So have a great night and keep in touch. Thank you.